everyone. We've got a nice river scene today. This is Normanton-on-Soar. So nice colours in the sky. Simple draw, though you've got to watch this line here. I did it a little bit too steep and then I've brought it back in. So you're just going to get your water line in and the reflections in the water and then the trees mapped out loosely. I haven't put so much of this in, just a little bit in the edge, and then these beady bits in the bottom here as well. Okay, so colours wise, I've got Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, you could use raw sienna. I've got permanent rose, I've got cobalt blue, then I've got cobalt blue and light red. Now this is making a very bluey grey, so not too much of the light red in there. This mix here is Gamboge yellow with ultramarine, so it's making a dark green, and I've taken a tiny bit of sepia in there as well to make it nice and dark. Okay, so we're going to start by getting everything above the water in, then we'll worry about below the water after. So it's really today technique. So plenty of water on here. I'm bringing it all the way down to the water's edge, but I'm not going to put everything in at this stage. It's just meaning that I'm not going to get that hard edge. I don't want that at the minute. Make sure your water's nice and clean. Around number 10, just checking it's clean because the last colour I've mixed up was the green. I'm going to come into my lightest colour first of all, which is the Naples yellow. Just going to pop some of that in. I'm going to brush a rinse. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of rose. Make sure that you haven't got too much on the brush. You don't want to eliminate all of the Naples yellow you've popped in. So you're bringing this around the Naples yellow really. It's a little trick to stop the blue and the Naples yellow mixing together. Then we're going to come into the cobalt blue. And just bring this loosely through. You want to keep it darker towards the top and towards the bottom. You can bring it all the way over these trees, it's not going to matter. I'm going to leave it quite light in the middle. And then into my grey colour, which is quite bluey. And I'm going to start to bring in these clouds. Concentrate on getting this nice big one at the top. If you think the clouds need to be smaller, then swap to a number 6. So I'm just going to swap down now. And I'm going to just bring into this bit here. So remember that little circular motion is what makes it look cloud-like. So some of this is going to have trees over the top. So you're just concentrating on getting these little clouds in. If when you come on it looks like it's moving too far, dab a little bit off on the brush. This bluey grey needs to be quite thick. Remember, you're creating an impression of, it doesn't have to be exact. Try to make it look random. It's quite difficult. I'm trying to make sure that I haven't got a pattern happening. It feels quite pattern-like at the minute. Just going to make this bit a bit wispier. It feels like I'm doing rows. I'm just making sure that I don't end up with too many rows. I'm just going to come back into this bit at the top here. So this bit was a tad wet, and the reason I know that is because it's spread out a little bit too much. So I'm just going to come back in, just create that darker edge again. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to add some very distant trees starting to appear in here, so if I can just see where I'm going. So this is that darker green. I just want some of these to be a bit softer, so this helps do that. So it's that darker layer I'm just starting to get in. If you're at the right point for your paint, you'll find it's not flowing too much. If it's still quite wet and it starts to flow, then stop and wait a minute. Just getting these very distant ones in. Bit of a gap here. find it's dried in places a little bit, I don't want you to worry. So it's dried a little bit more this side, but it will still work as a base for these trees. It's just that it's drying in places. It's going to give me a nice base. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off now. So that's nice and dry now. So what I've got here is a mixture of gamboge. There was still a tiny bit of that green on my brush, but it doesn't matter. So I've got a dab of gamboge, a dab of sap green and a dab of sepia. And what I'm going to do now is start to come on to dry and just start to get the rest of these, a base for these shrubs in. I think I'm going to come over with a bit of either stippling, might do a bit of both, stippling and sponging. So got to get this section in now. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the gamboge. And that will work nicely anyway with the blue underneath. Then I'm going to start to bring in a little bit, whilst it's still wet, a little bit of sap green. So I'm not being too precise about this because this is just my base. I just want that base for the shrubs that I'm going to sponge in later. And then a little bit of sepia. And I just want you to concentrate on getting the sepia. You can use a bit of your dark green as well if you want, just on that bottom edge. So where all the shadow is, that's where you want to pull that sepia in. It's going to help define the edge of the water and the reflection, because it's quite hard to see in the photograph. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this darker green that we've used up above and just dab that in places. Again, it's just going to start to build in some shadow. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's nice and dry. So I've got my round number 6. I'm holding like this. I've loaded it with sepia. What I'm going to do is catch the surface of the paper to start to create these fine bits of foliage that you can see up here. If you get an odd bit that's blobby, I don't want you to worry. It's all about randomness, this is. This is working, you just got to keep it nice and close. It's a bit more density down here. And then I've got a line writer. We can use a rigger. I actually find it easier if I turn it upside down. I turn my photograph upside down, and I'm just going to pop in where these might be. Again, impression of, doesn't have to be exact. It's quite good if you can bring bits of branches to the bits that are floating. That works quite well. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so I've got a sponge that I've wrung out really well, and I'm dabbing into the dark green colour, and I'm just going to start to build up some texture. So you can do sponge, you can do stippling. I'll do a bit of both so you see the difference. So I'm just dabbing on. So that's just the dark green. I don't think I really need any more in there. I don't want it to be too detailed. With the stippling, so this is just a soft hog hair brush. Any hog hair brush will do. I'm going to use a little bit the sap green, and I'm just going to come in a bit lower here, so it's a much finer effect. You don't want the brush to be too wet. I'm just going to come in a bit, you might see that better then. Just stippling on. Okay, I think you can just about see that. I'm going to dry that off and then we'll come on to the water. Okay, so we've got a similar process now as to how we started with the sky. I'm going to come on and get this base in, so make sure you get plenty of water on to start with. And we're going to reflect what we can see in the sky. It doesn't have to be exact, but you do want to get it fairly close. I'm just checking I've got my brushes nice and clean because I'm going into the Naples yellow to start with. The difference with this now is that water can have hints of green, so you're less worried about what's happening in the water with the Naples yellow. So I'm looking at the photograph and I'm also looking at my picture, so making sure that I'm gaining the colour where it needs to be, basically. And then into the rose. Then into the cobalt blue. Because you're doing the water, you want to try to get this nice sort of horizontal stroke. And then you're going to come in with the bluey grey. Just start by getting that bit on there. A bit of the bluey grey here. Just because I need that to settle a little bit before I come in with the other grey. I'm going to come on with a little bit of the dark green where these trees are. So I'm just going to start to get the little bit of reflection. So this is the lighter green that I can see. It's nearly grey. That's the bit that I'm doing at the minute. Just that sort of bit above. So I want you to look at what's reflected from your picture. It's a slightly shorter reflection. That's what you're aiming for. Those darker bits being reflected first. I've got this bit here as well, which is actually another shrub as well. So I'm not going to do too much of that. I'm just going to bring in a little bit of water just there, a damp brush, just to soften that a little bit. So I don't want it to be too hard. Right, I'm going to come in with this grey, the bluey grey. Let's see if this is settled enough to reflect these without it expanding too much. Sometimes it's easier to turn this sideways so you can see a little bit better what you're reflecting. You can get lost a little bit in the lines, not knowing what you're reflecting where. So that is quite helpful to do that. It's a little tip. It's easier to see the reference of what needs reflecting where. As long as it looks a little bit like it tends to work, you're alright. Doesn't have to be too precise. And at this point as well, I'm going to get a damp flat brush and I'm just going to start to come through just to create this surface on the water. You don't want to drag too much colour. What you're trying to do is just create that surface, and it will come through these and ripple. Going to go sideways just to grab that quickly. Should start to get the ripple effect happening. We're going to build on this in a minute. So it's just a damp brush coming through. You can do it with a round, just a little bit easier with a flat because it gives you the right angle. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off and then I'm going to come back into it to do a bit more. Okay, so that's dried nicely now, and I'm going to follow the same process that I did above, which is to come in with the green, the yellow and then the green, sorry. So this is the Gamboge yellow. Then come in with a bit of the sap green, so we're starting to create the reflection, and because the water's quite still, it's quite a precise reflection. And a little bit of the darker green. And a little bit of the sepia as well. This will really help bring out that edge of the water. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. And we're coming back in with the dark green and the sponge, so we can start to build this up. So you're just really creating something that looks very similar below. It's a slight bit shorter. And do that same stipple in with the sap green just underneath here. Up. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. So I've got my round number 6 loaded with sepia, and we're going to do a mirror of this tree now, as near as we can. So I'm just looking where I'm going and trying my best to replicate it. Doesn't matter if it's not quite exact, it will still work. Remember that thing where if you turn sideways it's easier to mirror. Takes your eye in a different way and it helps it. And down this way. Then when you've got to that point, if you get a damp flat, and I just want you to just try and break through a little bit. Don't necessarily need to put ripples on, you're just smudging through what you've got, just so you're starting to get a ripple effect. Just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. So that one's dried now. I'm just going to pop in, so this is just the watery grey, just a few ripples here and there. So it's quite nice to do with a flat. So it's just adding a few ripples in the distance. So that's dried off nicely. So with the dark green now, I can start to just pop in. So this is straight on to dry. These grassy bits. These in and just paint them in. Just gives a little bit of foreground detail. And then I also want to have a look at this little bit of a shrub here. So I'm coming in with my sponge in the dark green. So I think I can get a nice natural shape here. And the shape's been reflected as well. I need a little bit darker green. I'll come back to you in a second. Okay, so I've just made up a little bit more of the dark green, just a bit thicker, so it's just the same gamboge, ultramarine and a tiny touch of sepia. And I've just sponged back over and just done a few strands out. And now I'm just using a little bit of neat sepia just within the lower section, just to give it a little bit more of a darker reflection. It's really hard to see in the light at the minute. Then with again a damp flat brush, I'm just gonna pull through just where the reflection is, just to start to again show a surface on the water. I don't want to do too much, just enough just to show that it's the surface of the water. So that's lift off within the darker green, or just pull a little bit of the green that way. Do a couple of ripples like that, and it just gives that feeling of breaking the surface. You can see that there, look. I'll do another one just here, just lift it off a little bit So it's just a damp brush, lift the line. That just gives a feeling of the surface of the water. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's all dry and I think I'm pretty much there. I hope you've enjoyed this week, so I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.